tell us a little bit again, I know that you had, sold a company, you had the CEO at Talent Quest, wanting to do the service side, try to productize. Walk us kind of through, I know you're as a entrepreneur CEO coming in on board from that leadership position, it's a very different culture fit, right? From writing the rules completely to maybe there's a compromising process. Can you maybe talk about how you kind of evaluated that opportunity?
Yeah, it was a great opportunity, I thought, again, just because the opportunity to leverage technology, again, which was in its infancy, and really at the time was just a personality or behavioral based assessment to look at, helping organizations find the right talent. And that was intriguing to me. But the broader vision that Frank Merritt had, our CEO, was to really expand that and really to try to leverage technology to automate a lot of the processes that existed within organizations with, again, how you handle goal setting and performance management, how we continue to train and upskill and reskill employees, and how we actively do succession planning. And so being able to leverage that expertise that was being delivered from the services side of the business already through technology. And so as he and I spoke and really looked at and discussed that vision, there was a lot of value there. And it was an exciting opportunity to come in and try to work closely with him with his vision and the vision of others as well, to really kind of grow the technology, which is really what we've done, and it's been an outstanding journey.
So obviously, in some cases, a company like Talent Quest, and love for you obviously just to tell us what Talent Quest actually does, but from those of us who've got an analytics background, the more the merrier, meaning the more number of people, the better we can be predictive of behavior, the better that we can understand behavior and see that there's a fit. So tell us a little bit about what Talent Quest does and the relationship of the population of an organization in your ability to predict success with a new potential employee or existing employees.
Yeah. So, what we do is really provide a technology platform. So it's a full enterprise level SaaS-based platform to really help automate what we refer to as the talent management lifecycle. And what I mean by that is, what do we do and what do organizations do to hire employees on the front end? And then once we get them there, how do we manage them? How do we develop them? How do we coach them and ultimately retain them? So it's all about getting the right people in the bus and getting them in the right seat. And so from an analytics perspective, and kind of what we look at is let's take kind of the candidate selection perspective, which is a difficult thing. Everybody on this phone is either interviewed and for jobs, we've interviewed other people's as we're hiring them. It's a tricky step, and it's not always easy to find the right talent. What we do is try to add more science to that process, more objectivity to the process. And we do that by leveraging a proprietary assessment that we've built. It's, again, looking at core personality traits and characteristics as well as their cognitive ability. But JP, to your point, first and foremost, we need to understand, well, what does success look like for this given position in this given organization, which can be very different to another organization. And to do that, we will test existing employees in the organization in a specific role. We'll also then pull performance data and information into the mix there. And ultimately, what we're looking for is to try to see what are the specific traits and characteristics that top performing individuals in a specific role in a specific organization exhibit. And then we can create algorithms and using predictive analytics there to then give us a basis to, when we have a candidate, let's test them and let's compare them to that benchmark and see what that fit looks like. So it's a very scientific approach. It works. It's tried and true. And again, adds a great deal of objectivity to the process. And while at the same time, basically removing bias, which is another important thing always, but it's critical in today's day and age as well, is how do we remove bias from the process and how do we make it more inclusive? Assessments are a great way to do that.
Yeah, literally, that was actually what I wrote down on here, bias in the system. Because, obviously, companies like Google have been putting a lot of predictive analytics in the hiring process. And one of the things, even on online search, one of the case studies is if you type in whether it's scientist or certain types of roles that may have been male in the past, that it is creating bias that may be what the search is producing today. So maybe walk us through, and we're all doing analytics models and we're figuring out how to use them within our organizations. Walk us through just how do you think through bias and how do you remove bias, but also keep high predictability within the system?
Yeah. Well, the way in which we're going to remove it is we purely take a data-driven approach to it, right? So when we create that initial benchmark or that I was referring to, it's by working with the company to say, all right, we're going to test a cross section of your employees in this role, and we don't care or nor need to know anything about the individual. We want to look at the raw data, and then we want to introduce and again gather that performance data. Again, we don't care who it's coming from. We want to look at the raw data, and from that we can accurately say, here's what this data is telling us, and we don't know anything about the individual, male, female, race, ethnicity, any of those things, just the data. And we can say your higher performing individuals, based on the data that's been provided, this is where they tend to fall on these different traits and characteristics that we're measuring, and here's where your lower performing employees are, and then here's where we want a candidate. When you take just the data, it's removing that bias. Well, then when we apply that to candidates, again, when we provide the analysis back to that, all we're looking at is candidate data versus the benchmark data. And so it's a great way to remove that inherent bias that is, even for people that aren't trying to be biased, we inherently have some biases within us. It's just natural, as hard as we try to remove that. So it adds a great deal of objectivity to that process, and really kind of giving you raw information on the individual, as well as then giving additional data to help probe. Because we all have our strengths. We all have areas that we need to improve. And so we can strengthen that as well by providing additional questions, behavioral-based interview questions that can go in there to help the hiring managers and those involved to probe further to determine, all right, how is this person going to fit into this environment, to this culture, to this job?
Very cool. One of the things that's always interesting is small, medium, large organizations. I was working on a project whenever the bottling group for Coke got acquired and integrated into CCE, and you've got tens of thousands of manufacturing plant employees. For those of us in the data space, that's like heaven. You've got huge sample size, you've got a lot of variety, a lot of different plants around the world. And so you've got the ability to really fine tune the quality of predictiveness versus
Yep.
say, organization like mine, I don't have thousands of employees. How do you guys approach that problem in small data sets versus large data sets? And are you able to use some of the learnings or maybe some of the anonymized data from other similar industries into your models, into other organizations that may not have rich of data? How do you kind of deal with that?
Well, you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly what we do. I mean, so ideally, if the organization is big enough and there's a big enough data set, we want to start just from that organization. But as you move into the smaller organizations that don't have the volume of data, we'll take anonymized data, and we will take that down to position level. So we have what we refer to as a number of quote unquote generic profiles. So they're generic in the sense that they're not specific to your company, but they're maybe more specific either to the industry as well as even to a position within the industry. So financial services is a great example. We have 45 or 6 different generic profiles that have been developed over time, that can be used and leveraged by smaller financial institutions, for example. So that's a great way to do it.
So the dreaded personality test. Those of us, over the last decades or half a century or a century have seen a lot of these different types of personality tests that are, it seems like somebody else is getting good information. I get some feedback. I don't know how to use it. I don't know how that connects with different types of organizations, and employees that are being hired. So walk us through what's the relevancy of a personality test. How do you guys approach that data gathering process? And are a lot of the ones that we've done in the past, like DISC and I don't know, I can't even count the number. Do they have any usefulness, or should we just throw them all away and go to Talent Quest?
Well, always come to us, right? I'm biased. No, I mean, there's a lot of good assessments out there, and there's a lot of bad assessments out there, and that's the tricky part because there's just so many of them. A lot of it comes down into the not to get too technical, but really the construct of the instrument itself, and really looking at the reliability and validity of it. So is it going to consistently produce the same results for the same type of individual, and how easy is it to manipulate? So a common one that people have heard of is Myers-Briggs, right? Or people refer to as the MBTI. Good assessment is to be used as kind of an icebreaker when for team building sessions and things like that. Not a very good instrument to use for candidate selection purposes because it's too easy to manipulate. I could ask you to say, all right, JP, I want you to be a used car salesman and answer this. And I could say, now I want you to be the CFO of an organization and answer this. You can manipulate the results a little bit more. So the assessments, if you're using them for candidate selection purposes, or we're using them for internal mobility purposes, you want to find one that has strong reliability and validity, and it's getting at a granular enough level to give you the information you need to really learn about that person. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. It's people that are at the center of all of these processes we're talking about. It's people that make organizations go. So how do we figure out and speed up and accelerate that process to getting to know the candidate? Get beyond the fluff, get beyond the I'm putting my best foot forward. So there are a number of good ones out there. There's some wonderful ones that are out there. And I think that's kind of the key is just to make sure you do your research to make sure you're using one that is going to hold up and be reliable, be valid, and ask those difficult questions around legal defensibility. We've been doing this a long time, and knock on wood, we've never been sued, or none of our clients ever have. But a lot of that has to do with the construct of the assessment.
So when you're going through it, I've seen this in so many organizations. They do it either as a rah-rah event that is motivational to get everybody to kind of get on the same page and how people behave and function, or it's done similar to like what you said on the front end, where it's the upfront assessment. Well, people change. The world it changes. I think even in our own company, we've had 3-4 different kids, multiple marriages, divorce, all these different dynamics. So how do you guys take that into consideration over time, how the data may adjust and how that may fit the role? And also, how does that evolve whenever people are looking for maybe promotion or different areas of the organization that they want to shift in?
Yeah, no, very, very relevant point there. And we do, core personality is something that's largely ingrained in who we are. It's in our DNA. That said, there are certain life events. You mentioned divorce as a common one that can have an impact and tweak some of those things. If we take a trustfulness versus distrustfulness, somebody goes through a difficult or painful divorce, their level of distrust is going to probably rise. So certain life events can shape certain elements of our kind of core of who we are, but it's not going to drastically go from one end of the spectrum to the other end, right? That said, so we encourage, and actually we've got this built into the algorithms in our platform for our clients that are using it, that it will trigger after, we typically say after 2 years, it'll trigger the need for a new assessment. Now, you mentioned another thing that I think is critical is all too often, and we've seen this, is companies will use assessments on the front end to make a decision, and then they put it on the shelf. And then we don't refer back to that for once that person's there and we're thinking about how do we coach them? How do I communicate with this person? How do I engage this person? What other jobs might they be good at? What is their potential? So we've had a lot of fun over the last several years in taking that core data from our behavioral assessment and now overlaying that throughout the rest of our platform so that when a manager is looking at somebody's profile in our system, and it's going to give them insight on how do I coach JP? What's my management approach with JP? And how is that different than what it would be with Kevin? Or if I'm having a performance conversation with Jody, what pushback and communication challenges am I likely going to have? And even the system's going to recommend adjustments that you can make to have a more productive conversation. Same thing with building teams. We've got a whole team simulation, team builder component built in. You touched on of career progression and those types of things. It's a great way to model that and look at that is what is the impact of of this team in general, what roles and positions people naturally take on, but what's the impact if we were to move somebody from that team to somewhere else, or somebody else is going to come in and join it. So we've applied that, all the information data from the assessment that we have and applied it to the rest of the life cycle for that employee, which is so critical, we believe.
So performance is interesting. So
yeah,
I've gone through my Tony Robbins decades ago. I've read my whatever self-help motivational book. And I think to a lot of degree, it's what you said. It's my personality has a propensity for increasing performance, just period. It doesn't really matter who the program is or what the book is. So you have, like you said, some level of ingrained personality that's going to drive performance and accelerate. But what are the things that you guys look for, or how do you support organizations that want to take performing employees and maybe accelerate their success in the organization? Because a lot of those employees you're trying to find at the top of the organization, who can we promote quickly because they're performing better rather than just a tenure model, which is, they just have been around for a long time.
Yeah, no, and it's a big part of kind of our overall view of things is, again, it's how do we continue to grow and develop employees? And so there's several ways in which we, at least our approach and our position on this is that people are complex things, right? Beings. We are made up of our core personality, which we've already talked a lot about. We also have experiences that we bring to the table. We have skills that we bring to the table. But we need to continually grow and develop those. So we have tools in our platform that help an organization with identifying what are those competencies and proficiencies and skills that an individual has, what gaps exist today in the role that they're in. And then we have, again, algorithms and intelligence built in to automatically recommend learning, e-learning, to address those gaps in the current role. Well, we can do the same thing for other roles in the organization. So if we're thinking about, I've expressed interest, again, we have tools in here to say, well, Kevin, what are your career interests? What are your desires? And then from that, we can also then say, all right, well, if that's where you want to go, here's how we're going to help you get there. And again, leveraging technology to do that. Same thing as we think about organizations often will look at their people and say, all right, let's take a lens of looking at who are high potentials. Well, first of all, how do we identify potential? So we have a potential assessment that's built in that's, again, adds objectivity to the process. And then what next roles we think those individuals can go in. So this is all a process called a talent review, at least in our world, how we refer to it. Great exercises to go through to help us understand the talent we have in the organization, their level of readiness to move in the organization, and help us see gaps from a bench strength perspective, and can create targeted development plans to help us logically move and target and build our talent.
So the qualitative process, is it gone? For example, like I have this bad habit. Whenever I'm starting a new company, I get really excited about people. And if I think that there's this gut feeling. So my wife usually ends up being involved with that process to calm me down and give me more realistic perspective. Obviously, if I've got thousands of employees, I can't do that. And that's probably not a good idea in the long run at all. But how does the qualitative process get involved as part of this quantitative process? Can you give us, and is there like a weighting system? Is it similar to kind of like a machine learning model where certain people who might be interviewing might have different weights? Just walk us through kind of how you think about that.
Well, it's a critical part. And as much data and information as we have and automation that's there, these are still tools and it's data. And at the end of the day, it is up to the people, again, that are making these decisions to leverage that data, to use that data, but to use it as a tool. So you still got to use your own judgment. You still got to look beyond the data, around the data, through the data. And so the qualitative component of it is still critical. And let's just go back to our assessments. We'll give a kind of what we call a similarity index, which is kind of a representation of how similar the candidate is to the benchmark, the profile we're looking for. But we don't say higher or not higher, because ultimately you need to use that data that we're providing in combination with other interview data, with resume data, with all the other data that you have to make an informed decision. And so that's a big part of what we preach to our clients and just in general is data is important. It is predictive. It can help you make better decisions, but you can't and shouldn't just rely only on that data. You got to use other elements and as part of that process. And part of that is your own gut feel and looking through it. You don't want to ignore the data, but you gotta challenge it as well.
So, there's different types of employees, right? So, for my company, I have a call center operation in Panama, Costa Rica, India, and other locations. We'll keep on expanding. Those employees have different characteristics, and we want to treat them as individuals. But at the same time, we may be having hundreds of people in the similar type of a role versus in my senior leadership, there may be only 3, 4, 5, less than 10 people that are very unique in kind of their skill sets that are a lot more complex, their ability to have the ability of multiple responsibilities across that. Can you walk us through how do you go through the difference of process where you still create an environment that is focused on aligning who the individual is, the culture, the values in the organization, but where a role may have to hire hundreds of people versus 1 or 2?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the hundreds of, when you get hundreds or thousands of people at call center environments, again, there's core traits and characteristics and qualities that you're looking for in those individuals. But that may be 4 or 5 things. And I'll tell you, like in our case, we measure 16 core traits. Well, let's just say there's 4 or 5 critical ones, could be 6, who knows, that are there. Well, because people often, and maybe this may be part of where you're going, is you don't want to have a bunch of clones that are all running around the exact same. You need some, diversity of thought. You need some diversity of people. So even though we may be similar in those 4, 5, 6 core qualities that are traits that are needed, we can also still be very different in the other 10 plus areas. So we're really looking for the critical traits that are ones that are more predictive of success, and we're less concerned about those other ones that make us uniquely who we are as people. So I hope that's kind of getting at what you're talking about when we're thinking about the masses, right? So we're not just hiring clones across the board. When you get into smaller situations, then it's more complex. And, yes, you want to leverage data and assessments, but you also got to have, this is where it's so important to have more consultative approach into these things as well. You've built several companies, and when you build that leadership team, it really is critical to look at, what is it we're trying to achieve organizationally? Where are we today in the maturation process of the business? And, from that, what are the skill sets that we need so we can marry that together? And because nobody can do everything, and nor should we do everything. And so it's all about making sure that we properly build that team together. So That's a little bit more of a complex process when we're talking about building a leadership team. Again, there's additional data points and viewpoints we want to bring into that, and clearly understanding what are their roles, what are their skills that we need to bring together in this cohesive team.
So Tony Hsieh a while ago had this book that became famous called Delivering Happiness. And I kind of relate to it with a lot of, if we're hiring a lot of call center reps, like you said, you want diversity of thought, you want different perspectives, but most importantly, you want to have people who are excited about their role, no matter how big or small it is, and their experience with other clients. Does the system allow, from an organizational standpoint, to give advice to the organization how the organization can improve by enhancing the experience to employees at scale at all?
Yeah. Well, employee experience is a critical thing across the board, and we're seeing more and more of that. By the way, it's going to get even more important and more challenging in some ways in the realities that we're living in right now. More work from home, more remote employees. I think that's going to be good for businesses in a lot of ways because it's going to open up the talent pool. And so we can start thinking about hiring the best people, not just the people that are the best person that's closest to me. But that employee experience is going to be a critical one. Engagement is a critical one. So a lot of that is going to be not just in the hiring process, but is going to be incumbent upon leaders and leadership teams to create a culture that focuses on that employee experience, that encourages engagement. So how do we do that? Some of the ways that we do that is through making sure that we're creating and leveraging technology to create an environment where employees can quickly and easily get feedback from other people, can provide recognition. We're in that world, especially as we think about our younger generations. We want instant access to information. We don't want to wait for feedback. I want it now, and give me a way to do that. So leveraging tools that can provide and facilitate that. From a philosophical approach too, how do we encourage managers and leaders to make sure that they're having those frequent conversations with their employees to talk about, how are things going and how do we improve things? So it's a combination of technology, JP, and, again, we focus a lot of this in our solutions of providing those tools, but it's a combination of technology, and it's a concept and a combination of a methodology approach, a process, a belief. And so there's some behaviors that we as leaders need to learn and adapt to make sure that we're putting in place to foster that culture of feedback, of engagement, of collaboration.
So one of the components of hiring anybody is paying income, right? And I have seen every single study on the earth of compensation only goes so far. I've got employees where some people don't care about money at all. They've already made money. They're in it for the long run. I've got people who don't care. They just want to have a great experience. I have people who want to make as much money as they possibly can right now. And then there's this hybrid model of people being like, I want more equity. I don't want as much compensation. I'm in it for the long run. I don't want any compensation. I'm completely in for equity and for the long run. So how does compensation kind of fit in that equation at all? Because obviously it's a big thing.
Well, it's a big thing and it's a complicated thing, just as you described, right? Because the where people stand on that thought of compensation is all across the board. It not only is based on kind of maybe where they are in their lives and their family situations will certainly impact that quite a bit. And you will see that ebb and flow, as their family situation, their life situation evolves. You'll also see that certain people genuinely just aren't as money motivated as others, right? And that's okay. You have some that are very money motivated, and again, that's okay. We shouldn't say that person's selfish and the other one is not aspiring to be as much as they want to be or we think they could be. So it's a lot of that is understanding, and again, it gets back to we can leverage technology as much as we want, we can automate as much as we want, but we can't take the human element out of these things. And again, it's people that are at the center of these processes. So we got to have those conversations. We got to understand where they are and what drives them and what motivates them. Because I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it where you have a situation where you have an employee who really could care less They're like, as long as I have this level, I don't need to be here. I'm happy right with the level of compensation. I need enough to make and get by and do what I need to do and support myself. But once I have that level, I want to be in a great culture. I want to be in a great environment. I want to be in an organization where I can grow, where I can have fun. Look, the reality is we spend way more time at work and with our colleagues than we do at home. And everybody wants to be in a situation where that is enjoyable. It's motivating. They're pushing each other. So it gets back to that culture piece that's so critical in an organization. Whoops, I got to move around in my room to make sure that continues.
So the dreaded 360 performance review. I've had third-party consultants do it at several of my companies, especially where you have large hierarchical type organizations, huge departments. And then there's there's a fear component related to it with a lot of employees, because not necessarily the feedback, but sometimes a lot of the feedback is connected to bonuses, to other compensation and perks. So it could be a fun or horrible nightmare depending on how an employee perceives it. Any thoughts or perspectives on that whole process of the senior, the junior, the left and the right giving you feedback depending on the organizational structure?
Yeah, I'm a big believer of 360s as a tool. I'm not a big believer of including them as part of a performance management and compensation adjustment process. So what I would say there is you separate them, and because 360s, there's nothing more valuable and insightful than really understanding how are you perceived by the people that work around you. And a lot of times what we think is very different than what others think. And so from a self-awareness perspective, it can be incredibly valuable for an individual and to help with their growth and development. But 360 should be a developmental tool and a developmental process, not a performance management or compensation process. And that's the big difference of where we see, and again, where it can get misused.
So we've got a couple more minutes and then we're going to open up to questions. So for those of you on the line, either put your questions in the chat or get ready to ask them. And as usual, I try to pick on some of the people that I know in the actual session here. So couple things here. So I'm a big believer on one-on-ones, meaning make sure that you're meeting individually to build rapport with the team members that you have around you beyond just the, hey, get this done, do this, what do I need to get done, and more of a tactical. With the world being super Zoom now in a lot of white collar type occupations, people are meeting with people a lot less on a personal level and building a rapport. What's the place for building rapport outside of the, almost like the water cooler talk? There's been positive and negative related to that as well, where people feel excluded from conversations that they're not, really interested in. And on the flip side, that it's pretty critical that people build trust and rapport. Any thoughts or perspectives on that, especially now that so much of us are working digitally and online?
Yeah, I'm a big believer of it as well, JP, is that those one-on-ones are critical for an organization, for a leader, and really for every employee. And we got to be very intentional about it. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think it's an important word, and it is in the intentionality of that. So from a process perspective, what we try to work with a lot of our clients on is really, again, creating that process, that commitment organizationally, and providing a structure to where we can support these one-on-ones conversations. And again, that's another place where technology can be great to help enable that and support that. It can't force you to do it. It can schedule it for you, and it can create that agenda for you. But it can't force you to have the conversation. So leverage the technology to allow you to help, again, support it, to make it easier. But at the end of the day, it's about facilitating that one-on-one, that connection. And then from there, again, some of the things that we focus on as in the solutions we provide is not only making it easier, not only helping suggest agenda topics and items that would be relevant for the person in the role. But again, also then when we have that conversation, to help both of the individuals connect with each other and understand how to best communicate and connect there. So if we can increase those connection points and we can increase that awareness, then we should see better engagement and we should see better productivity. So it's is it getting more challenging? I think it can, but I think at the same time I would flip that and say there's no better time to be able to lean into this right now. And it's critical. It's more critical than ever. We can assume, oh, we're talking all the time when we're on these Zooms, but no, let's take the time to talk one-on-one, me and you. And I think it's really important too to make sure that when you're doing that is to take some time to talk about some non-work pieces. You know, what's going on in their lives, what are their interests. You know, that's where we build that rapport as well. So we got to talk about the work that needs to be done to help move the organization forward, but we also got to connect with the people that are there.
So one of the questions that came in was about ramping up and ramping down. So when there's huge number of hiring or a large number of layoffs, which we've seen a lot of that this year in different industries and different companies, you know, morale is a big factor. How do you carefully onboard a large number of employees? Or, you know, if you're letting go of a lot of employees, how that affects the morale? Any thoughts on how that process is done or what you guys do, or, you know, how to approach that?
Yeah. You know, I think in that increased communication and transparency is critical. And people will understand. That doesn't mean everybody's going to like it, but people understand. You know, look, we've gone through a global pandemic that nobody could predict it, and there's no playbook for this. But the organizations who, even those that needed to downsize through this process, the ones that have been very successful now are the ones that were open with the organization and communicating the what's behind it, what's driving this, sharing information as we go, being vulnerable. I don't know what's going to happen, right? There is no playbook for this. I don't know what's coming next, but I do know for us to continue that there's changes we got to make. And so I think that element of increased communication with transparency, being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to say, I don't have all the information, I don't have all the answers is important just philosophically when you think about these things. Once making those decisions, yeah, now you can again get back into leveraging, you know, the data and the information that you have to help make more informed decisions about the who, right, and the how, whether you're downsizing or whether you're rapidly hiring. We had a client that was in the healthcare space that, as we all know, at the beginning of this, the hospitality industry was hit pretty hard, right? And this particular client did a lot of work with elderly care. So we worked with them. They needed to rapidly hire we're talking thousands of employees to help with care. And so again, on the how side of those things, as we worked really hard with them to truly identify people that were empathetic. You know, we were actually, I think they were very successful in being able to leverage some of the talent that became available from the hospitality industry, and those that are service oriented and have a good sense of empathy, and, you know, bring them into a different environment and give them the proper training. But it's really about who they were. And so again, I think it's transparency, it's trust, it's communication, it's vulnerability. But then in the who, let's leverage data and make sure that we're doing it the right way.
So one of the questions that came has to do with one of my favorite words called agent-based modeling. So agent-based modeling is really what Librium Research Institute is focused on, pioneering the science of not just predicting what an individual does, but predicting how individuals interact with each other to create some kind of optimization or increased output. So obviously, when you are predicting a person coming into an organization, there's the culture, the values, all these other quantitative factors that you're putting in. But then there's the dynamics between the other employees in the company. Now, with 2 people, that's one thing. With 500 people in a manufacturing plant, that are going to be interacting on a day-to-day basis. There's so many different types of personalities and characteristics and issues that people face and values. I don't watch news anymore. I read Financial Times, which is about as boring as it can find, but people get very heated about these kind of things. And so the dynamics within an organization could explode. Any thoughts on kind of how, quantitative measures can take those types of things into consideration?
Yeah, and building teams, right? Culture, that's such a critical piece. It's a complicated one, as you mentioned, and it's one that continues to evolve. And cultures evolve, environments evolve, people change. So yes, there's tools that we've built, and there's ways that you can do that in a way to look at simulating what a team environment would be and how people will work together, not just like we have as individuals have personalities, a team has a personality. And so how do we help a leader understand the personality of his or her team? But then within that, if you took everybody on this call and you put us on a project to go solve a problem, we're all going to naturally take on different roles within that team structure. With this many people, we're going to probably have, some people who are going to try to be that driver mentality. Some are going to be more creative problem solvers. Some are going to say, hey, I'm going to take the action items and the follow-up stuff. So in a team structure, understanding what those roles are and what roles people naturally want to take on is critical so that we can leverage that and not fight against the grain, but let's go with the grain on that. And so again, we have some tools that we use and leverage within our platform to provide that visibility, and then to do those simulations so we can help simulate the impact of people joining a team, moving a team, putting them together before we make those critical decisions.
So one of the questions coming here is, one of the keys in leadership is to identify what people excel at, the roles that you put them in, and amplifying their skills. But sometimes the role that they're in isn't necessarily the right fit. So I know you go in an organization that already have a lot of employees as well. Is there a way of identifying not only the skills, but where a person should potentially be and shift over? For example, you have a lot of students, just generally speaking, who are like, oh, data science and machine learning is the greatest thing in the world. And they go into the field, they may even graduate, but it may not be a culture fit for who they are. It may not align, but they're just going to do it because that's what everybody told them or their parents told them. And so they keep on going through that path. And then you find them in an organization where they're in this role that, yeah, they may have some skill set, but really who they are doesn't fit that role. And if you've got a large enough organization, there's the ability to do lateral shifts and move the organization individual around. Any thoughts on that process of when you go into an organization and you find people who are not really a great fit for what they're doing, that they get shifted over to something that's a better fit?
Yeah, and that's a critical part of kind of continuous kind of talent management, talent evaluation is really understanding. Again, there's multiple things that make up who we are. I mean, we got our personality, we got our interests, we got our experiences, we got our skills, and it's the combination of those things. Like you said, you can have somebody who is a great salesperson, but you put them in the wrong organization, they're not going to be happy. It's not that they're not a good salesperson, it's that they're just in the wrong culture, they're in the wrong environment. You could put them in they're great. You may have, like you said, somebody that has certain skills, just because they have the skills to be able to perform a job doesn't mean that's the best place to fit for them and where you can leverage them the most. So it's a combination of looking at personality, it's a combination of looking at their skills, but also the capability of that individual is such a big part. And again, just because somebody has the skills doesn't mean from a capability perspective it's the best way to leverage them. So you got to look at all those things. You got to talk about those things, and because there's multiple factors that go into it. Again, leverage tools, leverage technology, but at the end of the day, you also have to discuss that and bring that people element into it.
Another question came here around, there's actually two questions that came in. Meritocracy versus tenure. A lot of organizations, I'm actually sitting on a committee right now. We've got several hundreds of thousands of employees in this organization. We'll call them employees. And they're shifting from a tenure-based system to a meritocratic-based system. So performance-based, promotion, as opposed to I've been around here for a decade and that's why I deserve a promotion. That's a big culture shift, and it can cause a lot of anxiety for people who are set on this is how I'm going to be rising through the ranks. And on the flip side, what I've seen is that very talented young people start leapfrogging people who've been in the organization for decades, because there's that shift. Any thoughts on that approach of a meritocratic versus tenure, or even the transition between tenure to meritocratic?
Yeah, I think more and more organizations are moving away from the tenure-based approach. I mean, does it still exist? Yes, but I think that what we're seeing in today's day and age, to continue to evolve and grow, and as quickly as things are changing and the world is changing and business is changing, that we got to make sure that we get the best and the brightest people. And let's face it, it's also demoralizing for a lot of employees when they see, here's somebody that's clearly doing a much better job, but yet they didn't get the opportunity to get promoted simply because they haven't been here long enough. Now, there's some levels of experience where you have to have that, but I think we're seeing more and more organizations shift to leaning on performance and results as we go through that. I think the organizational structure of companies has also changed quite a bit over the last even 10 years, and even in the last year. You're seeing organizations shifting to a more team-based approach versus a hierarchical approach. And that is, to me, is a great shift, and changes the culture, changes the way in which we think about promoting and developing, because again, it's less about a title and a role here, but more as I'm on this particular team, here's what we're being tasked to do. I need to get the right people with the right skill sets on that team to achieve this goal. So I think it's, all of those elements are at play. And I think when you're making that shift, again, I'm going to get back to something I said earlier, but it is making sure that you over communicate, you're very clear and transparent in what that shift is going to look like and how that's going to work, and that you take care of people along the way. And if we do it the right way, it's all about, rarely is it ever what's said, it's how it's said that can make or break situations.
So the related question that came in is very interesting and controversial. It's relevant for right now, is inclusion versus meritocracy. So I had an individual I talked to who's a partner of a firm that's got tens of thousands of employees. And they said basically this year, they've had this new checklist. And if a person hits the checklist, they're going to get hired and promoted. And it was minority, female, and the list goes on. And you've seen this shift culturally where we want to make sure that there's an open environment for anybody to be able to move up. But at the same time, it's also created this other situation where even the people who are getting promoted are not sure if they're getting promoted because they're the most qualified, but because they meet a checklist. So any thoughts on kind of that whole process and the balance of that? And I would assume that a quantitative approach should hopefully help with that process even more.
Yeah, I think it does, and it should, a quantitative approach to it. At the end of the day, I think it's critical and important for organizations to give opportunities to all employees, and it shouldn't matter based on your gender, your ethnicity, any of those things, right? We need to be intentional about making sure that we're hiring people that are representative of the population that we're in, and we're in diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of experience. All only makes an organization better, in my opinion. And so I think we need to be careful and be considerate of making sure that we're providing the same opportunities for everyone out there. If we are, again, good about how we're hiring people and on the front end, and making sure that we're hiring the best and being intentional about that, and making sure that we're creating a diverse environment, then then it's incumbent upon, once we have those individuals, to make sure that we're providing a consistent experience for all those individuals. Then I think it takes care of itself. But there again, there is some intentionality that needs to come in play from the leadership team of an organization to be that and do that. It can present some problems, as you said, about somebody, if they're just promoted because they feel like they hit a checklist. That's demoralizing to that individual and to the other. So we want to make sure that we're creating the right opportunities, we're creating a diverse workforce, and we're providing the same experiences, and continuing to push people. And I think we got to be intentional about it.
Perfect. Kevin, thanks so much. One, it's great to catch back up with you. I thought this was an amazing session, really kind of marrying this really soft and quantitative approach towards something that's super critical in all of our lives, being in an organization, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, or government.